I always start with a just a simple question. Basically, what's your typical Sunday like?
Oh my goodness. Um, Usually, I would prefer not to do anything,
Just a
and
full day of
so
rest, like for real, huh?
it really is. You know, sometimes I will be reading, listening to audiobooks. But usually, what I prefer to do is lying on the bed and then just listening to audiobooks or watch programs, true crime programs on YouTube. um, if I don't need to get out of bed, I would prefer to just stay up. Like that's my Sunday.
There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's what a Sunday is
Should
meant to
be
be
like.
if you want it to be that way.
Yeah.
I went and got brunch today. I went to place Luella's up in Lincoln Square. It was pretty good. It's really good actually. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna take a second. I'm gonna intro everything and I'll be right back with
Okay.
you. All right. Welcome to Storyteller the Storyteller. I'm Shannon Cason. Storyteller the Storyteller is creative conversations about storytelling, about creativity. I talk to a lot of storytellers. I'm a storyteller. I tell stories on stages, pages, on my podcast called Shannon Cason's Homemade. Look out for more episodes on that coming soon. But I've been telling stories over 15 years now, and in my travels, I meet so many different people who also tell stories on stage or on written ways, or if they do podcasts. And this is a area where we can all have a discussion. We could talk about this craft that we love, storytelling. Today, I'm talking to someone I met a little while ago, and we always kept in contact. I'm talking to Dr. Ada Cheng. Dr. Ada Cheng she's an educator, she's a storyteller, she's a producer. She does a lot of workshops and different storytelling functions where she talks about serious topics. She also has fun, but she talks about vulnerability. She talks about social issues and those things. And I want to kind of dive into that a little bit with her to find out more about her mission and all that. Because when we first met, she she's a tenured professor or was a tenured professor. We can get into this, but she switched to storytelling. And when she switched, I was like, you're going to do storytelling instead of being a, so I want to kind of get into that more too, because I felt like she was on purpose and on mission with her decisions. So I want to find out more about that. But I'm going to bring her up. We can have a conversation and talk more. Dr. Ada Cheng. How you doing?
Very good. Thank you. I think this is the first time I have seen you tell stories before, and I think this is the first time I've seen you, host a show on podcast or YouTube program. This is the first time.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, when you invited me, I think we met in 2016.
Yeah, yeah. So we met, and I remember slightly. Like I think you reached out because I had been doing a lot of with storytelling in Chicago, and
Yes.
I think in some way we met or we saw each other, and then we went to get coffee. I remember
Yes.
we was in Hyde Park and we had coffee together. And I don't know if you were in your professor position at that time, but you were interested in storytelling, and you were asking me a lot of questions about storytelling. And that's what I kind of know you as, like inquisitive person, but also I met you you was an educator in a sense, and I
Right.
also know you as a storyteller now because I've seen you done so much in storytelling. But you also combined the two to where you do a lot with workshops, and I see you do some interesting work
Right.
there. Very curious about that. But also, you still tell your everyday stories as well, and get people excited about telling their stories. But you also touch on social issues and race, inequality, women issues, LGBTQ issues, all these things too. I want to find out more about that. Go a little deeper though. Those are the things I know. Go a little deeper. Introduce yourself. Maybe some things I'm missing there.
Absolutely. I think, in 2015, I started learning how to tell stories. I think when I met you, I left DePaul officially June 30th, right? Even though I think when I met you, I was already out of school. I wasn't teaching. So I was at a time already telling maybe at open mics and some shows, very early stage of my storytelling. Um, and to be honest, when I first started, I still remember going to the moth and, I was telling stories that were, funny and entertaining. And in 2016, still remember 2016
Yeah,
in
yeah,
terms
yeah.
of national politics, right? I think there was that kind of a politics that made me realize, um, I was already telling stories in the classroom, my personal stories, but in academia, when you tell personal stories, oftentimes it was delegitimated, right? It's not seen as legit. It's not objective. It's not scientific. And so when I left the university and started telling stories, and with our political climate, I realized I really want to tell stories that respond to the social concerns of our time. And so at the time, I started telling more stories about myself being an immigrant, being an Asian American, stories about racism, about violence. And then gradually, as I started to feel more comfortable, with telling stories and particularly telling vulnerable stories, then in 2017, I started telling stories about gender based violence, for example, sexual assault, intimate partner violence. If you remember 2017, um, what happened, Harvey Weinstein, right? And
Okay,
so
okay. That was that period of
absolutely.
all these things. They were always in light, but becoming in the public light where people were actually calling
Absolutely.
out people. Yeah, okay.
So I realized my own kind of a journey in storytelling. uh, there's always kind of a line with what's happening in the larger world, right? And so there's that kind of a coming back and forth in response to the social political climate of our time. And and and, and it's that journey that really allowed me to combine, right, my own scholarship and my own training in academia and the art form of storytelling.
Now,
And I
where would you be? Okay, so you're telling the everyday life stories, kind of learning the pro. I mean, you had already been telling stories because you was in class all the time. So
Mhm.
I remember some of my best professors, told good stories. That was the whole idea of being in a fun class or a class you enjoy. They would tell you stories about their career or their lives or different people that they knew along the time. But then when did you switch and then where? Like would you tell these stories at storytelling shows? Like more poignant stories on specific issues? Would you tell them at shows or was this in your okay?
Absolutely. So in the classroom, I didn't learn the specific art form,
Mhm.
right? For example, how to package a story, the beginning, the middle, and the end. I didn't know any of that, right? And so I took a class in a second city in 2015. And then so in August 2015, I started taking storytelling classes. That's how I kind of stumbled into it. I was doing improv, I was doing storytelling, and then I started doing open mic in December 2015. And then at some point at the end of 2015, I promised myself I'm going to start going out there, open mic, attend mods, kind of tell stories in public
Mhm.
rather than just staying, in the
In the
classroom.
class, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so I did go through that stage of, what's my next goal, open mic, and when people see me, they started booking me to shows. That's how I got started.
When did you what? Okay, you made a significant change, right? Tenure professor. And I had a professor. I worked with this one guy. I can't remember what school it was. It was in Maine. It was in like
Hmm.
Lewiston, Maine. You know, but it was a popular school, and he was a tenure professor, and he would tell me what tenured mean. You know, and I'm like, okay, that's a big deal, right? So that's a
Right,
big deal from being just a professor at it, because you can, but if you tenure, you there. You know,
right.
why make that significant change, or what prompted that significant change? And then why storytelling? Could you have done both? I was always
Yes,
curious on that
yes,
when I met you.
yes. So looking back, if I look at 7 years ago, did I need to leave academia to do storytelling? No, I didn't. But leaving academia was actually the best thing that I have, best decision, one of the best decisions I have ever made for myself.
Mm,
And I would say, number one, what I was recognizing was I was already struggling with leaving, a tenure position for previously for 10 years. I came here as an immigrant in 1991. And so getting my master, PhD, and then publishing, getting tenured, it was a big deal for me. And it's like
yeah.
I arrived, I achieved my American dream, right? So I had a middle class lifestyle, condo, prestige status, but then I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy because there are structural inequalities, institutionalized racism. There's also the issue of I wanted to grow as a human being. I was getting bored with a particular form of writing, right? Academic discourse. I was getting bored of teaching the same subject. And the truth is, for the 10 years that before I really finally made the jump, I tried out different things, right? I thought I'm going to teach full time. That's my full time job. It provides me with this a comfortable living. But
Mm-hmm.
then you know how you do things half ass, right? You have a full time job and it's like underside. And I try out different things, and the only things I think at some point it just got to the point where the environment was too toxic, and I recognized that because of the toxicity of the environment, it was affecting me. And regardless, whatever I was advocating, whatever I was demanding, the truth is, when you try to demand change, that whole process is going to change you. And I realized that I was becoming someone I didn't really like,
Mm,
right? I was constantly angry. I was, constantly hostile. I was frustrated, both with the institutional context, but in some way, it's also because I was frustrated with my life. and and I felt like I was in this position, a good job. Everybody kept telling me this is
yeah.
a good job. Everybody covets this. But the only thing, that feeling where everybody's telling you have a good thing, but the reality is I was not happy. And I remember there was at one point, like one night in November 2015, 5 minutes before midnight, and I recognized that night was really the night that I had to make a decision. It was very distinct because at some point, at one night I was like crying. I was like in the middle of my apartment. I was feeling miserable. My cat came to me wanting to be petted, and I was so miserable that I yelled at her, "So you go away." And at a moment, I was thinking about my father. My father was this typical, Taiwanese man. He would go to work, right? Went out to work, uh, supported his family, but he was deeply unhappy with his life. And he would drink himself, just drunk every night. And when he came home, he would take it out on his family, which means my mother and my brother. And for decades I was literally like running away from my family, running away from this man. I deep down I know the last thing I wanted to be was to be like my father. You know how
Mhm.
when you try to stay away from your past, you don't want to become that same person. How do
Mhm.
you stop it? Intergenerational trauma. But at that moment when I was yelling at my cat, I realized I was becoming like my father. I was toxic. I was abusive. And I had a thought. I thought, thank goodness I don't have children. Because imagine, because I was so angry, I would be taking it out on if I should have children. And I just realized at that moment, I was turning into someone I didn't like. And
Mhm.
and I realized, I thought to myself, whatever the university is paying me, it's not worth it. No matter what happens, you don't want to become someone you don't like. So that night, like 5 minutes before midnight, I just asked myself one question. And that question is, am I going to be okay if I have to wait tables and wash dishes? So I came to this country, and I spent my whole adult life in academia. Academia was all I knew. I got a PhD, but I really didn't have any other marketable skill.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I really didn't know, what does it mean to jump off the cliff to pursue art and performance. I didn't have a roadmap. I just knew, I asked myself that question, am I going to be okay? And my answer is yes, at least I would be happy. And then I just send an email to my colleagues, and I say, after 15 years of teaching, I'm done. And that's how I left my tenure position. At just one night, around midnight, I composed an email and sent it to my colleagues. That's how I left my tenure position. But it was a process that took 10 years. And finally, I realized it's more important that I'm happy, that I do something with joy, that I do not want the institution to change me as a human being. And the truth is, I'm somebody, any job, any work is decent, as long as you're doing, with integrity. It doesn't matter what I do. And I just remind myself, nobody can take that degree away from you. You don't need the institutional affiliation to validate you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No,
But
I
what's
get it. Yeah.
important is that you got to be happy. You got to do things with integrity. And so I left. And it took me a year to tell my family. I didn't imagine.
They probably were real like what?
Imagine being
Because in a sense you
being
have that's
Asian.
a pinnacle position. Tenure is
Right?
you just for life,
You know
do what
how
you want.
how they found out? My brother connected me through LinkedIn. And at the time, I think on LinkedIn, I already indicated I left the university. And at the time, I published a mini um, memoir about my journey of leaving the university. And so he bought it, he read it, and I still didn't talk to him, right? It took
You
me,
didn't know this. This is not something you knew. You didn't know he bought it, read it, and all that. Okay.
I didn't. And eventually, I finally sent him a message. And I say, well, you probably already know I left DePaul University. And he said, yes, I know. I also bought your memoir and read it, as long as you're happy. Shannon, I just started crying. And if I cry, that's just me being Ada. That was probably the most important thing. It's like, imagine telling your family, hey, I travel halfway around the world carrying two suitcases And then I went from being a professor at a university where they would talk about and my mother would brag to her friends to I'm becoming an artist, and so for him to say, as long as you're happy, and
That meant the world. Yeah.
that was so important. And when I share it with my mother, and my mother is my, she simply say, "Well, are you able to make a living?" Um, and to be honest, I didn't know. I had no clue, and I say, "Well, I figured it out." And so,
What restaurant are you working at now? I'm just like
yes,
I would like to come visit.
come eat at my. I have been lucky,
I'm
and
talking stuff. I'm talking stuff. But when your mother said, "Will you be able to make a living?" What was
what did I say?
your?
I just said, I'm going to be fine. And the truth is, I didn't know. I I think Shannon, you're also an entrepreneur, right? Uh, all of us are trying to make a living, as an artist, and however you make a living, right? And the first 2 years, was a struggle. Trying to make a living without a full-time job, and I don't think people would believe me when I say, well, I I was broke at some point, and I ran out of money, so I went back to work as a full-time staff at a university, and then I left after a year and a half. After I left my last job, I promised myself, no matter how hard it is, I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to have to just find a way to make a living as an artist, whatever it takes. I'm not going to work 9 to 5. So it has been a journey. It was a struggle the first few years, um, and so I manage. But I'm also blessed. I work very hard to be blessed.
But in your work, I do see where you take all your experience,
Yes.
because when I look at your website and go to her website, it should be in the description, and but is it adacheng.com?
RenegadeAdaGen.com.
Explain this renegade thing. I mean, it's a renegade. It's
It was
not
it was
thing, but explain the renegade.
renegade.
Description.
I
Yeah, yeah. What has that always been a
Yes, I
description,
think
or was that something you grabbed?
it's renegade. Simply, you probably know a friend of mine described me. He kept on saying, "You're a rebel. You're a rebel," and I know I am, right. I think very differently, and I also think very independently. I see things. Oftentimes I see things that others may not see, or I would do things that I know other people will not want to do. For example, leaving the university. I know a lot of faculty members want to leave, but they just don't have the courage because, when you have this job, monthly salary for the rest of your life, it's a very comfortable, you know, living, right? But I think when I say it's the best decision, it's also because everything I literally have to relearn everything, all the tools and marketing, how to promote myself, how to make a living as if it's not entrepreneur, right? Combine artist and entrepreneur, we're all entrepreneurs, and I have to learn everything, from scratch because
Yeah.
it was so comfortable at a university. I never had to think about what it meant to make a living when you don't have the kind of a secure monthly income.
Yeah, yeah. So in your experience, like that whole movement was a renegade move, just I'm leaving and I'm pursuing the arts. That has some renegade, but also in your in your way of thinking as well. I like to kind of get into that a little bit, like
Absolutely.
some of the things I'm thinking. Now, when I go to your website, renegadeadacheng.com, it's a comprehensive website. It has a lot in it. And as we kind of started this conversation, I was like, wow, you have been on the move which is expected, but I'm saying from the time you've left to now, I see so many different speaking engagements, so many keynotes, work with different other schools as
Mhm.
well, then your workshops. Talk to me about that a little bit. What books and workshops and how did some of those things come about?
Um, if I don't work, no income comes in, right? So I hustle, right? That's a grand thing, right? Um, I very early on.
I see Mother Boomer in the comments there. She say Ada is inspirational. Courage.
So think about this. Um, very early on in my storytelling journey, and of course, all of us wanted to be the star, right? We want to tell stories. And in the beginning, I was telling on different shows. I was booked on shows outside of Chicago. And the first 2 years, I also took my solo performances to different places. I love that. I love performing. But then I also realized that at some point I wanted to producing my own shows. And so I started doing that in 2017. And I'll tell you why I decided to do that. And that kind of touch upon, you talk about vulnerability, right? I when I started out in 2016, I think you're also familiar with the Chicago scene. I was one of the few Asian American storytellers, right? And predominantly the shows were mostly produced by white producers. And I said this as somebody who was accepted, who I was booked. People were very friendly, welcoming. That's never the issue. Um, but at some point, I realized oftentimes the shows that I tell stories, I will be the only right person of color, woman of color, and sometimes one of the few, right? And so as it also became popular because people wanted to book me, and I will be the
Yeah,
only
yeah.
one. The second thing is oftentimes I will be the only one tell stories about violence and trauma, racism, right, misogyny, and the rest of the stories will be entertaining, funny, right? But it was told within a context that the centers around entertainment. Does it make sense?
I
So the
get you.
show
I
itself
understand. Yeah.
is for entertainment. It's oftentimes at the bars, right? And I would be one of the few, sometimes the only one telling stories about violence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And oftentimes, the third thing is oftentimes predominantly to middle upper class white people. It's not that they're not friendly, always receptive to my stories, but at some point you realize, number one, I shouldn't be the only one, right? We live in Chicago, millions of BIPOC folks, right? And so that's number one. Number two, um, I feel I wanted to create a show that is trauma informed, even though it's not necessarily trauma centered. Meaning, I oftentimes tell storytellers that you don't need to entertain the audience. If you tell
Mm,
a story that matters to you, that's truthful to you, the entertainment will come. But if you simply focus on entertaining the audience, that defeats the whole purpose.
I love
And so
that.
I
Love
oftentimes
that.
say, tell a story that matters to you, and tell a story that you have been wanting to tell, but you haven't had a chance to tell, right?
Yeah.
And I say, if you also know I'm creating the space, that it is a brave space, that you can tell stories. Why are people afraid to tell personal stories? Because, shame, embarrassment, stigma, judgment, for fear of judgment. So be okay, feel comfortable to share stories that are vulnerable, that you may not, but I will create a space for you to feel brave enough to do that. And
I
I
get
will
it.
create a space that affirm, right, your experience. And so it's trauma informed, even if it's not trauma centered. But tellers know that this is a show that they can take a chance. And I also, tell storytellers that take a chance in your art form. I don't, be experimental, try out, try new stories, try something you have never done.
Yeah.
uh, be brave, right?
Yeah.
I'm not looking for ready-made story that you have to tell it perfectly. I would rather that you tell a story that you cannot find any place to tell a story that you want to scream to the world, but you are looking for a safe space, a space and brave space to share. This is it.
No,
so
I,
so
I
i
get
i,
it.
I wanted to create that space. And then the last thing, this is so essentially is, how do we, the third thing is, how do we cultivate a different kind of an audience, a different kind of an audience that maybe reflects, right, the BIPOC communities, right, and also a different kind of an audience. I always believe that audience needs to be cultivated,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
right, so they appreciate, right, they know, they come to the show, they appreciate the particular approach, right. And so, right from the start, that has been my kind of the goals in my mind, that I want to create a space with different audience, that I want to create space that is trauma informed, and I can affirm people's experiences should they decide to tell stories about violence and trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number three, I also want to make sure that I do community outreach and reach out to as many BIPOC folks or queer folks as possible. And I want to avoid, this is really the most important part. Oftentimes we see the same storytellers, right, circling, right? And I want to avoid that. And
Hmm.
so I oftentimes in a very, I do this very intentionally, right? We talk about equity in the art scene, and part of it is, and a lot of the shows are always they want to book tellers that are experienced, that are uh, good, right, or that are kind of a
Entertaining.
visible, right, visible or famous. I never feel that I need to build a good show based on that. And I always believe that to give new people, right, the opportunities. So 90, right, 90, sometimes 95% of the tellers are new tellers, first time tellers. They have never done storytelling before, and that's really my goal, is to reach out to communities that I know, reach out to people that I know they have stories to tell, important
Yeah.
stories to tell, even though they may not be able to tell stories well yet, but that's okay. I'm happy
Mhm.
to, storytelling is like using your muscle. The more you do it, the better you
Yeah,
become.
we all do it. We all do it. And you bring up the things you bring up, I definitely relate to, because I started my podcast in a sense to tell stories that I didn't, some of the stories I don't feel comfortable telling to the audiences that might be at most storytelling shows. And I don't want to necessarily switch my stories around. I switch things around to fit an audience, but at the same time, I don't want to always have to do it. I want to speak to sometimes different audiences besides that audience. That audience who's just taking a peek in the window at my life. But I like to talk to some people who really relate to exactly specifically what I've been through, and they can know that they're not alone. And I think through um all kinds of shows, and then specifically through my podcast, because I have people write me and they'll say, "Oh, I can understand you went to go look for apartments with the Starbucks cup, as a big black dude, you know what I'm saying? I go get me a Starbucks cup. So when I go to my apartment shopping, they have a distinct, they remember Starbucks, so they're like, oh, he can get the place or so, like little
Mhm.
simple little bitty details, but people will relate to it because somebody just sent me a message on my review talking about that. But I'll put these things in all of my stories, like don't have to be trauma filled or anything else. I
Mm-hmm.
used to, even with um like learning different communities, like you like even yourself, like
Mm-hmm.
I'll listen to your stories, or I'll find comedians who may be in a community that I don't understand as much or I don't know too much about, and I listen to the comedy and I can learn more, because comedy is a form of truth telling, so
Mm-hmm.
storytelling, comedy, all these things, they have a lot of truth to them. That's what makes them funny or entertaining. It's not so much like they're trying to entertain, but the truth in it makes
Right.
it entertaining in so many ways. I liked your you had a series called Dare to Tell, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
you was kind of bringing up that in a sense with the conversation you was just talking about, but but but
Dare,
a lot of your series have a great, I love that name, Dare to Tell. I was like,
dare
oh,
to
that's a great
tell,
name.
dare to connect, right? And I oftentimes connect that with vulnerability. And in terms of, when you share vulnerable stories, you're essentially telling the audience that you trust them, right? Right? Because facing strangers, right? Unless you trust them, you share vulnerable stories because you trust them, and in return, right, you also invite them to trust you. And I find this to be very helpful, right? Very, very important, for example, in team building, right? In a classroom, right? Building in terms of the intimacy and the trust. And so I also teach, it's not just the vulnerability, it is what you say to the audience and what you in return invite them to trust you. And so, dare to tell, dare to connect. I have changed my approach differently. So, I get invited to tell stories. The first 2 years, I will go and tell my own stories. I think since 2017, 2018, I realized I really want to excavate stories from different communities.
Oh
And so
wow,
at
okay.
some point, um, I would say when people invite me, I always propose, what do you think if, in addition to my telling, I will give you a quick workshop, and then we have some sort of storytelling circle and open mic,
Yeah,
and then we invite your community members, right, to share stories. And I will show you how to bring the community together through storytelling. And
yeah,
I will show you how to create trust and intimacy. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
the workshops is something that I have been doing. I will always, because it's, for me, is I always ask this question. In a sure, I can be of service, just tell my stories. Absolutely, that's easy, but I will be of more service if I, give you the skill set. When we say give somebody a fish, as opposed to the skill set to
yeah,
fish, right? Is how about I teach you how to, do this, so you know how you can implement that in your own organization. And
yeah.
so that has been my approach with a lot of nonprofit organizations and corporations. I would say, let me teach your team. Let me teach your, for example, students or community members. Let me teach you storytelling. And let
Yeah.
me show you how to invite community members to share stories.
No,
And then,
that's it's always that's always an amazing experience. Well, I think some of us do similar workshops or certain workshops with open mics and those things. But then when we do them, it's such an amazing experience at the end for everybody, because people don't know each other like
right,
they may think they know each other,
right,
because somebody will go on stage and tell a story, and at the end, it's just like this camaraderie between everybody.
right.
Because I've done those things as well, and uh, just me telling stories on stage is not that same feeling. I can tell about my life. Everybody gonna laugh. It's gonna be fun, but the people in the audience getting on stage and telling stories is is a different thing. So you're doing that as well. I love that. I
And
love that.
and then you learn, there are so many, right, in Chicago, millions, millions of people, right? um and just the amount of stories I have, excavated, and encountered, through years of working with communities, right? And over, I find that to be far more satisfying, rewarding for me, as opposed to me just being a performer. And so I have found a way to shift my approach to work with communities, whether it is in Chicago or every other place in Illinois. I always find, or universities and conferences, I always find a way to, spread the joy and the art of storytelling, to teach the art form, and just the variety of
Yeah.
stories that I have encountered, and that's very rewarding for
How,
me.
how do you get people to because you like trauma informed story, I mean not like, but um you work on trauma informed stories, sensitive stories, vulnerable stories. How do you get people to open up to be vulnerable in stories? Have you had any challenges, any backlash or
No,
pushback from those kind of stories?
because I never ask people to do things without myself doing it first.
Mhm.
So I always share a vulnerable story first,
Mhm.
and then so I have to open up first, right? I have to share, and the story I have shared, the story that I use to kind of demonstrate that is my own journey of leaving academia. But I go back and forth between that journey with, my memory of my mother and my memory of my father. And in those stories, there were very vulnerable components to it.
Yeah.
And so, after I share my story, right? So right from the start, I demonstrate, and I, model what it means to be vulnerable. And
Mhm.
then we kind of go through that process of, and I ask, how does my story change the dynamics in the room? Why is it important for me to share the story about my mother and father? What does it, mean? And I use that to talk about vulnerability, right? To share, in a sense, uh, to demonstrate the trust, right? And to build relationship. I oftentimes say, storytelling is just like any relationship. You want a closer relationship, you share something intimate. It's up to you to decide how you want to structure that storytelling audience, dynamics, that you have that control. And so if you don't feel safe, share nothing. But if you want a closer relationship, then you share something. But there's always a risk, right? You want to be closer to people, you move closer, but there's no guarantee that it will be returned. So I
Wow.
use that as a way to talk about trust, right? Intimacy, and vulnerability, and what that means. And so the choice is always in the participant. You
Yeah.
decide. But how you decide is, I always ask, just like in any kind of public speaking, it's not about the data or the facts. It's always this question in public speaking. And I say the way I teach, that it is going to be useful to you in any kind of public speaking. The first question you ask yourself is, what's the relationship you want to have with people in the room? They're not going to remember necessarily the number, the data, but you're going to remember the emotion, the feelings. And so I ask yourself, what's the relationship you want to have with people in the room? If you don't want any relationship, share something that feels safe to you. If you want a deeper relationship, share something intimate. But also know, when you share that, you're telling people you trust them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to trust you back. So that's why storytelling is an act of courage. It's an act of bravery, because you're putting into a relationship that you don't know if there's going to be a return. But it is a chance that you take. And so I say, right, in that decision, you are making a decision, and you are taking a chance. You're going to jump. You're going to take that leap. You make that decision. And I always say, you want to, you can be brave, but always know that you can also be safe as well. And so
I'm,
yeah, go ahead.
no, no, no. I'm getting so much from what you're saying right now. That I love that. What's the relationship you want to have with the audience? Because I think it goes like I think about because that is you do have to have certain questions for yourself as the storyteller who going in front of an audience. And if you ask the right question, it's almost like the AI or whatever. If you ask the right question, it can be like positioned the right way to take away fear, to take away all this anxiety that you may have. Like I always think of intention, like what's my intention in telling the story. But I do love what you just said. What's the relationship I want to have with everyone?
There
I
are,
love that positioning of that as well. Yeah.
and there are other questions. For example, when we say, what's the relationship you want to have, and we know they say, when we share stories, vulnerable, for example, intimate partner violence or sexual assault. Keep in mind, when we go up, with storytelling, we're always working against certain stereotypes, right? Sometimes if you don't share a story, kind of a well, sometimes it can affirm the stereotype, and and so when you share, for example, my second solo performance was about intimate partner violence, both in my parents' relationship, but also in my own relationship. And to be honest, as an Asian woman, Asian American woman, telling that story about my parents' relationship in front of a group of middle upper class white people, uh, what's the stereotypes that we're going to uh, reinforce if I'm not sharing in a way that makes sense. So, and this is not to and so I want to always make sure that how do we share. Sharing stories are always from our particular right experiences, but it is through these particular experiences we're sharing something universal. So I always want to make sure that I share, depending on the audience, that I'm sharing something, even though it's coming from my particular experiences, that there's, that we are connecting universally. And so I
Yeah.
always not only ask a question, what's the relationship we want to have, but also, who is the audience, right?
Yeah,
How
yeah,
am I
yeah.
sharing it? And so the same struggle.
No, I do the same thing. I look at the audience. So I've changed my story sometimes. I'm be like, I'm not telling this story to this audience.
Mm,
I switch my story around. I'd be like, I'll tell this other one because I don't want to talk to these people right now. Or
I
I feel like they might need to hear this, or I'll switch things around. When you have a lot of stories, you can do that. What
Yeah,
one question I have is, do storytellers have a responsibility, or do you feel like you have a responsibility as a storyteller?
I have a responsibility to storytelling or storyteller.
Just as a storyteller, do you feel a responsibility in telling stories, especially who you are as well?
Absolutely. I think that part of you say you're interested in my mission, right? And part of it is, I really would like to, integrate more and bring in more community members. When I use the term community members, I mean people who may not identify themselves as artists and performers, but they have stories to tell. And so I oftentimes I create spaces for them. I also would like to have more BIPOC folks, beyond the pool that we're seeing right now. And so I feel the responsibility to the kind of a art scene, right? The ecosystem that we're in. But I also, have a sense of responsibility to the tellers that I bring in. And so, for example, I bring in a lot of first-time tellers, people who have never done storytelling before, and and most often time people don't know the type of work that I have to do behind the scene, right? How do I walk them through the process and work with them on their craft, and so they can feel proud and good about their first time where even if it's just reading, I don't demand one way or the other. Some people, when they first started, they need to have that, piece of paper. That's okay too. The point is, everybody got a story to tell, and I want their story to be out. So I have this platform, and I am walking you through this process to help you through, right, to tell the first time. And I will say this, telling story, and I want to distinguish. I mean, we all share stories with one another. Like right now, we're sharing stories with one another, right? But there's something about sharing story in public, right, in front of a group of people that you may know or may not know. It's a very different experience, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
yeah.
public speaking. It's oftentimes very vulnerable, right, for people. And that for me is a threshold, particularly for a lot of Asian Americans, is we don't want to air the dirty laundry, right?
Mm,
We don't want to
mm,
talk about personal things and family things. And so there is that kind of a cultural taboo, right, that we don't share anything too intimate. And so and sometimes there's also, when you share stories about violence, and sometimes you are in some way calling out people, right, in the community, or people in your own family, right? And that's a very difficult thing, right,
yeah,
particularly in a community where people might know one another. And so I oftentimes have to walk people through, and really jump into that step where they really feel that they can speak that truth, right?
yeah, yeah.
Without kind of massaging it. And I oftentimes say this, I can really tell sometimes whether from their draft, whether they're trying to hide something. And I get it, right? And
Yeah,
I will say, I'm not saying one way or the other, but what I usually say, just remember, this is a public, you are announcing your truth in public. And the
hmm,
reality
hmm.
is, when you speak out loud, you can take it back because there are witnesses, right? And that's the power of storytelling. It's not just telling, it's witnessing. It's that dynamics, right?
Yeah,
And so I say, if people started asking questions in their head,
yeah,
is she mean that, is she saying this, you lost them. So if you, and I say to people, if you need to name something, consider it. You can say, if you don't feel comfortable, then you don't need to do it. But if you are brave enough, then in the kind of artistic, just know, if you try to talk in a very abstract way,
yeah.
what would
People,
happen is the audience is started going to
they gonna
wonder,
miss
what
it.
are you talking about? And
Yeah,
so I say that from the artistic point of view, from the audience point of view, but I ask the storyteller to decide what might be best for them. And the truth is, I have witnessed people, in terms of, it sometimes takes some time for them to finally name what it is, and that's okay too.
yeah. No, I love what you're saying right here because, and I can tell that you have an amazing class. Like your workshops, your classes are um, probably really inspiring, really, really breakthrough in some ways. But it is a thing where I talked to Dana Norris earlier, a few weeks ago, and she said, like, say the thing, say the thing. Now, in drafts, yeah, say the thing because nobody's reading this. I mean,
Right.
it's for you.
Yeah.
If I'm sitting out here at midnight and I'm writing something, say whatever I want to say.
Yeah.
But when
Yeah.
you go in front of the public with the witnesses in the audience, it takes it to a different level. And sometimes that does take time. You brought up that as well. It takes time. Like I
Yeah.
have some of my most vulnerable stories that I may have wrote, and it took me 2 years
Right.
to feel the freedom to tell it.
Yeah.
Or even sometimes, like you said, people keeping things back. I know that too. I can see that, and even in my own stories, I have to
Right.
hold something back because I don't really want to talk about this just yet, or
Absolutely.
it's not my I don't have the responsibility or the go ahead to go tell this on someone else's story, even though I might have
Absolutely.
been a part of it. So all those things come into mind when telling stories. But I love it that you push for vulnerable stories. You push for real life things, and people to be able to talk about things they may not necessarily, and for your community as well, and getting new tellers out there to tell stories. That's an amazing thing. Definitely Renegade.
Yes, I. So I was the other day thinking maybe I should change my name, but that's okay too.
No, I like it because it jumped out to me. I was like, oh, Renegade Ada Cheng. Let me do some segment. I want to do this segment with you real quick because I always like to know what people are doing or interested in. These are the things that that sometimes when you're looking for something, you're going through the TikToks, you're trying to find something. So okay, so this is called read, listen, watch, binge.
Okay.
Read, listen, watch, binge. And this is first thought, and then you can tell me why. What's a book you would suggest? What's a book like you read and you would suggest?
There's a book, Rest is Resistance, by Tricia Hersey. I would recommend that book. It's by, I believe there's a NAP ministry in Chicago. I think we don't, and this is kind of a tying to the grinding culture. We sometimes forget to rest. And we as artists, we feel that we have to be constantly grinding. We don't take time. And the truth is, you grow when you take time, right? I find myself,
yeah,
I become a better storyteller.
I'm working out, and they say the gains are made in the rest days.
I didn't share story. I minimized my own appearances for several years. Just I try not to be that person to tell stories. And the first show, one of the first show I did after the pandemic, an in-person show, I thought I was going to be rusty in my performance. And then as I was doing the performance, I realized I was actually becoming better, right? And I think we tend to believe that because you rest, you're going to become rusty in your craft. And that's just not true. Sometimes you become better because you do other things. And so I want to encourage people to rest in addition to work. Yeah.
No, what's it called again?
Rest is Resistance.
Rest is Resistance. Okay,
by
I'm gonna look that up.
Hersey. Yeah.
Yeah. What's a podcast? Do you have a podcast you like or
so
you enjoy?
I don't normally listen to podcasts, but I do like true crimes.
Me too.
YouTube and kind of a podcast. I will sometimes just kind of randomly select one when I'm eating, and then I will listen to true crimes. But there's one sometimes like true crimes with Kendall Ray. I do from time to time. I kind of scroll down and then I would her recording is actually on podcast. I do like her. So yeah, I like
to do it. What is it? YouTube? It's on the YouTube.
I there's so many true crime.
No, so many true crime things. My daughter listens to a lot of that stuff.
So
I'm like, what are you listening to? Triple murder. And my daughter's 14. I'm like, triple murder and
so true crimes.
All this stuff, Bailey Sarian or something she listened to. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty popular too. What about movie or documentary? Like, what would you suggest?
I like that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. I didn't like that movie in the beginning the first time when I watched it.
Okay.
But it was I watched it a second time and I kind of it grew on me. It's a very new way of, a new generation, new way of telling story, which I find it fascinating. And so I love that creativity. And, I wish I had a level of, and so in some way I'm like trying to expand my way of telling, right? My way of doing things.
Yeah.
And so I love that particular movie just for the experimental, element to it.
No, I like that you talk about that too, being experimental, because I try to do that as much as possible, even with storytelling, just experience. I mean, nobody told me any right way or wrong way to do certain things.
Yeah.
So I try little things all the time. So I like that you're in that element too. What
Yeah.
about TV shows? Everybody binging a TV show. Any
I
TV shows that you've been?
Netflix, there's one that I watched. Maybe I'm getting old. It's very hard for me to finish, but there's one. Do you know that Schick's Creek? That
Okay.
show? Yeah, I actually quite like that show. I think that was the last time I ever show I ever saw a series. Because I
What's
get
that
this.
about?
Gosh,
Like shortly.
a family, gay son. They were heavily in debt, and so they went to this kind of a town and then reestablished themselves. A comedy, but
It was a comedy. Okay.
yeah, it was very creative. And so at the time when I was watching it, I was learning how to write traditional plays with dialogues and characters. And that particular play really helped me to kind of grasp, right, the drama and the comedy, the rhythm, how to write dialogue and the characters. And so I quite like that show.
I love that as storytellers and writers too. When we watching something, we kind of learning from it as well. Like
Absolutely.
we watch it and learning at the same time. So it's hard to just we get it. We're in it, but we're losing at the same time.
Yeah. I
And
I
looking at it.
yeah, it's hard these days because watching. I don't have a TV, so watching Netflix is a lot of time. So sometimes I just have, watch YouTube, just one episode. That's as much I can,
As
right?
much as you can get through. Yeah.
But I listen to, sometimes audiobooks, and then I have been reading a lot of plays, but because I venture into playwriting, not just the solo plays. And so I've been spending a lot of time writing the kind of a plays, 10-minute plays. Yeah.
No, I love it. I love it. I love it. Quickly, let's go through this real quick. I call this Be Brutally Honest. I'm going to give you some categories. So you
Okay.
just choose the category and then I'm going to give you a prompt. And you just tell me a little short story. We could talk it out.
Gosh,
It's
this
not,
is
it's not like a moth story. We could talk
okay.
out the story.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying? So
Okay.
your categories are early spring, March Madness, and it's not just basketballs, but early spring, March Madness, and Women's History Month. Which category?
Okay. Women's History Month.
All right, a story about when a valuable lesson or word of wisdom that was passed down from a significant woman in your life. Or you can say pass, and I go to the next prompt.
Pass.
Story.
Pass.
Okay, a story about a friendship that's been tested and strengthened by life's adventures or life's adversities or life's
Okay.
adventures.
I think I can go with this one, but can I tell it in a different way?
Yeah,
But okay.
your story prompts are just to jog your memory. If
Okay.
something comes to mind and it don't even go along with it,
But
run with that.
this story is about self love and in a very fundamental kind of way. So it took place during a pandemic. So I am the speaker for Illinois Humanities. So I get requested, so they will send me to, sometimes conservative areas in Illinois, right? So you don't always know your audience. And it was a couple of years ago, probably in 2021, 2022. I was scheduled to do a presentation that evening. It was kind of virtual. Out of the blue, I received a message through my website. There's a, contact me, that website. And then I received a message from somebody who said, "Do you have love for this country at all?" Uh, I was thinking about if I want to attend your event tonight, but I didn't know it would be a waste of time. Okay. And so this person, he listed his name, his telephone number, and his email. In the midst of a pandemic, my website was not listed as part of the program. So literally, this person had to Google me.
Yeah, it looked you up. Yeah.
And he took a time to send his email, to send this message through my website. He didn't need to leave his telephone number, but he did. He did his name, telephone number, his email. As a woman, you know what it feels like, right? It feels like kind of a stalking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a presentation that night. And I was in a pandemic, right? Anti-Asian racism. Um, to be honest, as seasoned as I am, it's very unsettling. And
Yeah.
so I was like, oh my God, can I ask some of my friends to attend the event that night? It was, the same day, and I felt terrible. And I was keep on thinking, should I call this person? Should I ask this person? And every person that I was thinking about, I thought to myself, did I do something for this person? Did I do something for this person enough that they would say yes? Okay, does it make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Uh-huh.
And I'll keep going. I was thinking, have I done something for this person enough for them to be willing to say yes? And I grew up as somebody who have this kind of a childhood trauma, right? The
Mm-hmm.
pattern where I feel that in order for people to do something for me, I have to do something for them first.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
I
That's a
get
lot
it.
of people's trauma, right?
Yeah.
So I remember thinking, and I just realized as I was going down the list of my friend list, and I kept on thinking, I don't think, I haven't done it. So I was going through it literally. I couldn't quite figure out who could go. And then a friend of mine called me that afternoon. In the middle of a conversation, I didn't say anything. I just said, well, tonight I have a presentation. And then he said, and this is somebody I don't talk to often, but we always have good conversation. He always supports my work. And then out of the blue, he said, oh, I really can't make it tonight. But if you're in my neighborhood, I would have gone, but I can't because I have other things. I didn't even ask him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the middle of it, he just mentioned, I always want to support your work. If you have a presentation, I would definitely be there. But so sorry, I can't do it tonight. And I thought to myself, wow, somebody just offered, even without me asking. And that was when I realized the problem is not other people, the problem is me. I didn't feel that I deserved. Does it make sense? I
No, that make a
didn't
lot of sense. I
I
get.
didn't
I get. No.
believe that I deserve. So I couldn't even ask. I didn't believe that people would love me, that people would do things for me without me asking. And
Yeah.
and I realized the issue is not other people. It's me. That I didn't know how to love myself. It's my own lack of self-love that's creating the problem, that I didn't know how to, ask for help, that I didn't know. And so that was the moment that I realized, as much as I believe that I love myself, I know how to love myself, I actually didn't. I didn't know that love is not a kind of, uh, it's not that you give them, they give you, right?
No.
In some way, it's unconditional. But I always feel that people will love me only when I give them something
If I did something in advance, no, you
in
you you you
return,
definitely you hitting something for me as well. I think you probably
right?
hitting something for a lot of people. You get what I'm saying?
Right?
Because it does have a core to that of, do I deserve this? And
Right?
so what happened with the event? Did you go? Did you ask somebody? I don't know.
I didn't. So that night, I did a performance. That person didn't show up. Um, but it was that lesson was important for me to recognize
Yeah,
it's my
yeah.
own psyche, right? I still get caught up in this, and that's how my relational pattern, right? And so I have to kind of look at myself. why do I feel resentful? Why do I, right? And this, I always do things without, part of it is on not knowing how to draw boundaries, right?
So you
So
didn't ask anyone?
no, I didn't. I am that person. I
So
would
even though
tell
you
you,
had this
Shannon,
realization, this big aha
Shannon,
moment, you
I'm
still was
that
like, I'm still
person
gonna go by myself.
who would solve my problems. And that's probably my biggest weakness, is the thing that I have to learn. On top of learning how to draw boundaries, that I don't need to feel obligated to give. But really the biggest lesson is how to ask for help,
No, I
right?
love it. I love it. I love
Right?
it.
I
No, that's
can't.
real.
And I would be dead before I ask for help. And that's the thing that I kind of have to check. So these past few years, as storytellers, what's the most important thing? Work on yourself. I really have been just working on myself. um, and storytelling process, right, help me heal. But part of it is also, what's our responsibility to ourselves, right? And I think storytelling has helped me kind of see my own psyche, right?
Mhm.
Because a lot
No,
of
it
it's
is
our own.
definitely a self-examination too.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Because you even have to go back through your memories and what did I really, really feel here and all these things.
Yes,
It's been
yes.
it's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank
As
you.
always, we had our conversations with coffee. I'm glad we having this conversation again. It's been a while.
And we should
I'm
get
glad.
together since you're in Chicago. Which neighborhood?
Yeah, yeah, we'll
I'm not
definitely.
going to ask you which neighborhood you live in.
No, we definitely do that. I mean, I'm open. I'm in
Okay.
Edgewater, but let me ask you this: what do you have going on now, or is it anything coming up that we can look out
Yes.
for?
So next week at Volumes Book Cafe is March 13th. I host Pour One Out at Volumes Book Cafe. Uh, every second Wednesday of the month, and that's a monthly show that I've been hosting since 2017. And the past few years, each month I have a new lineup. People from different communities, oftentimes people who haven't told stories before, or I haven't seen them tell stories. And so stop by, and to it's a space that I think is very needed, to that we need to listen to stories, have sympathy, empathy, right, and compassion, and so we can make the world a better place.
I appreciate it. We got Tony Fisher out here. He said excellent conversation. He said great conversation, and Mother Boomer said excellent conversation. So
Oh, okay.
it's been a good talk. And Mother Boomer, look up Mother Boomer on TikTok. You're gonna love her stories. Trust me.
Oh,
Mother
wonderful.
Boomer on TikTok. Look up her stories. It's great. What share your? I got it all in the description, but just so you can say it as well. Share your social and then how people can stay in contact.
Okay, so I am. Uh, oh, it is. Let me. Oh, so. Oh, okay. How do I share it?
No, no, no. Just tell us. Just say it. Say it out loud.
Oh, okay. SJADACHENG. That's my Instagram. And so follow me on Instagram. I post my events all the time. And then website Renegade Ada Cheng. You can check out my events through the events. I'm hesitant to give out Facebook information
No, you
because
don't. No, you don't have
I
to
was
do it. Yeah,
hacked.
I just do
I was hacked
Instagram
a
and
while ago,
website.
so I don't know. The Facebook is unstable.
Yeah, yeah. I'm the same way. I'm the same way. You got to find me on Facebook, and I'm never on there anyway. But it's been a wonderful conversation talking to you. I've enjoyed our talk, and I've learned something in this conversation. You had me having some aha moments, so much
Ah,
appreciated. Much
thank
appreciated.
you.
I
Thank
appreciate it. I'm
you.
gonna say a few words and then
Okay.
hold on for a second.
Okay.
So this is Storyteller the Storyteller. Storytellers having creative talks about storytelling and other things. Be vulnerable in your stories. One of the things that jumped out to me was what relationship do I want to have with my audience? Like if I'm talking to an audience, what relationship, this even on my podcast and even on this, like what relationship do I want to have with you? I love that question. So make sure you like, subscribe, join the conversation. If you're into storytelling, look up renegadeadacheng.com, come to shannoncason.com. You can learn more about the things that we have going on in the workshops and those things. But like, subscribe. I'll be back to you next week with another storyteller. I don't know who yet, but we got some good storytellers coming up. So I'll talk to you soon. I always wait to the last second to do this little thing. Let me see. Bam, where's it at? All right. See you.
Now that's homemade.